Then after the Citizen Forum, we organized a stakeholder workshop where we brought together national stakeholders and experts and asked them, well, how can we translate these set of recommendations from citizens into an agenda for change that is practical and realistic for Belgium? The citizens arrived at their recommendations through group discussions and interactions with experts over 3 weekends and several specific deliberative methods that aimed to maximize in-depth discussions. A team of 7 to 12 coordinators and facilitators worked continuously in the background to adapt the methods whenever needed. This mind map shows the results from the first weekend, where citizens set the agenda and touched on the different subjects that they thought were important regarding the ethical, legal, and societal implications in genomics. During the Citizen Forum, consensus was often reached, but several areas of tension remained. At the end of the Citizen Forum, the citizens voiced 37 practical recommendations to present to the Minister of Public Health, but they were also asked which recommendations they deemed specifically important, or they wanted to see stressed, and those are the blue bars. And they were also asked in red to indicate which recommendations they fundamentally disagree with or they would like to add some critical remarks to. This is where Hannah, who has been following with great interest, remarks, I see that there's a recommendation where 6 people voted for it and 6 people voted against it. How is it possible that this recommendation still made it into the final list of recommendations? And the answer is that, well, the list of recommendations is mainly a list of topics that citizens deemed very important and where they want to send a message to policymakers. And sometimes that message was pretty clear. Sometimes that message was, this is a really important point to us, but an area of tension still remains. We haven't found a way out of this area of tension. And so I will read aloud 3 recommendations they made. The one with the most support, 2.42, on the use of genomic information, which says, we think that the use of genomic information, 1, should not be a ground for social, economic, and legal discrimination, for instance, access to services or jobs. 2, should not be used for the development of war instruments or arms. 3, should not result in the reduction of human diversity or social diversity, neither on a global nor on a regional level. In general, we think that in the use of genomic information, the human rights should be respected at all times. The next one, stimulating data sharing, which has a lot of support but is still being contested, and you can see why when you see recommendations. Some of these recommendations are formulated in an either-or fashion. We expect the government and society to maximally encourage citizens to share their data for the common good. We do not think that people should be forced to share their data. There are 2 possibilities. Or I am free to share my data and I am stimulated in this activity by the government, or it is a moral duty to share my data and hence my data are automatically shared. Nevertheless, I do have the right to decline this data sharing. One participant thinks that on behalf of the common good, data sharing should be an obligation without freedom of choice. The most contested recommendation was regarding privacy, where citizens said, my genome is mine. Even in a world where everything is apparently shared and commercialized, this attitude is important, since my genome covers more than my health and vice versa. What defines me is more than my health and or the potential illnesses that are discovered in my DNA. My DNA is a way of identifying me, and exactly therefore it should be my choice what happens with this DNA. Primarily, it should be my choice what I would like to know about my DNA, but it certainly should also be my choice with whom I want to share my DNA and for which purposes. For those of you who would like to hear more about this topic, I am happy to refer you to the talk of my colleague Chloe Mayer, who will later today talk about the conception of the genome within the Citizen Forum and touch on this issue further. In their recommendations, the citizens remark that healthcare is changing, and with it, the concept of patient is changing. They say, if a genomic analysis shows that someone has an increased risk of a certain condition, is this person, from then on, a patient, a pre-patient? How should we consider this person? What is their place in society? Are they entitled to healthcare benefits or no? How should we treat these kinds of persons? In general, they argue that in this changing healthcare landscape, it's important to have a multidisciplinary approach, and that the role of healthcare providers has shifted to a more intermediary person between the patient and their data, the patient and their health, the patient and technology. The patients argue that genomic technologies should be accessible for everyone, which means that reimbursement should be set up in a just way, and that personalized and accessible counseling should be organized to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to make a good decision about their genomic information. While the actual extent of this remained a hotly debated issue, all citizens claimed some right of privacy over their genome and some form of a property right over their genome, which led them to say that sharing this genomic information can only happen on the basis of trust. From this property right in one way or another, the citizens delineate their right to autonomous decision-making about their DNA, which means that they require information in order to give consent for the use of their genomic information. The most supported recommendation by the citizens in general was that genomic information can and should be used to support the common good. They understand the common good to be scientific research conducted according to the rules of the art, which enable us to better understand the human species so we can build up an opportunity-loaded and just society that maximally encourages personal development and fulfillment, to organize prevention and treatment in a targeted way so everyone has equal chances to live a healthy life, and it should be ensured that data are only used in this context. To make sure that the framework around the LC of genomics that the citizens developed is respected, it should be translated to a legal framework. This legal framework should be multidisciplinary in nature and should be a living document. One way the citizens advised this could come about was by installing a council of experts, a multidisciplinary council of experts that would develop a policy on genomics. The discussions during the Citizen Forum were transcribed and analyzed using inductive thematic analysis. From this qualitative analysis, it follows that citizens place certain responsibilities regarding genomic information on a societal level and certain responsibilities on an individual level. From society's point of view, citizens argue that it is clear that application of genomic technologies can be a huge force for good in society, but that there are risks involved. For example, regarding privacy protection or regarding discrimination of people. And so the citizens argue that the precautionary principle should be applied in order to promote the good outcomes as much as possible and to limit the bad outcomes. Citizens argue that at all times the autonomy of citizens should be respected with regard to genomic information. This means that citizens should have freedom of choice, access to good information, and good information should be disseminated as much as possible. The right to know or not to know certain things about genetic information for any individual should be respected at all times. And there is a fundamental right of access to data that has been gathered about individuals. However, citizens also note certain important exceptions to respect for autonomy, most notably when familial mutations are identified, but also when certain fundamental values are at stake. For example, regarding when individual decisions are possibly infringing on privacy protection, the common good, commercialization, or may lead to discrimination. In these cases, it can be warranted not to allow an individual to fully autonomously decide regarding genomic information. In general, the one core value that all citizens support is the value of equality, which means that even though in genomics the goal is to personalize treatments and to identify differences between people, genomics should be used, never be used to genetically discriminate, and should be used to actually enhance equality by enhancing healthcare for all. And in general, genomics is an expensive technology, and so efficiency and utility should be important markers in the development of genomic technologies. Even if a good societal framework for the health in genomics is developed, a lot of individual responsibilities still remain according to the citizens. If we give individuals control, it's still up to the individuals to exercise this control and to do it in an ethical way. If we give people the right to know or not to know, it's still up to them to deal with the information that's been given to them. Regarding privacy protection, if we give people the tools to protect their privacy or to make informed decisions, it's still up to them to protect their privacy and to act in a responsible way. The most important note to make here is that citizens on an individual level recognize that there is a duty to others, meaning that clearly in the case of a familial mutation being identified, you can have a duty to family members to inform them about your illness or your disease. But also in general, fellow patients or maybe some unknown research breakthrough in the future based on your genomic information might benefit others. So this duty is identified and appreciated by the citizens in their recommendations as well. Now, John, the numbers guy, wants to know how these recommendations are actually influencing policies. Well, I already mentioned the direct conversation with the Minister of Public Health and the stakeholder workshop following the Citizen Forum. There is a working group called Genetic Screening in Healthy Populations at the Superior Health Council, where the Citizen Forum has actively been taken into account. And there is the NGS Convention, where reimbursement practices are being regulated on a national level. That's also being informed by the Citizen Forum. But it is clear that more work is needed during the next legislation, and we hope that after a new government has been formed in Belgium, we will be able to continue our work to translate the recommendations of the citizens into practical policies. In conclusion, we believe that citizen deliberation should be part of any responsible, broad implementation of genomic technologies. More and more countries are turning to deliberative processes to inform their health policies, and the deliberative approach enhances public trust, especially in areas of social or ethical contention, such as the implementation of genomic technologies. Thank you very much for your attention. I welcome any questions and feel free to contact me after the conference.
Thank you, Vanis. That was a really lovely piece of research, really thorough. I really enjoy hearing about the Citizen Forum model. I've got a quick question I'd like to ask. What can you tell us in terms of sort of best practices or lessons learned from running these types of initiatives? Were there any challenges that you had to overcome?
I think the most important thing is to have good partnerships and good collaborations. So to find good partners, especially on the regulatory side. So for us, for example, our partner was the Ministry of Public Health, which is a very powerful partner, but then again, it's a partner that's not continuous in the sense that after elections, you never know if there's going to be another Minister of Public Health, and you don't know if the recommendations that you made will actually be implemented in the next cycle. So my main lesson learned would be the importance of good partners on the regulatory side if you want your citizen engagement to actually matter on this.
Yep. And a question here from the audience. Are the recommendations of the public in some way different from the medical perspective?
I think so, because the incentive for people who are actually sick and who would benefit from these technologies are different, because they have an interest in data being shared. They have an interest in resources being allocated to these technologies, whereas members of the general public can approach this issue from a more neutral point of view. And so I think in genomics, especially if we're trying to gather data from healthy people more and more, as we are right now, or as we are trying to implement genomics in screening programs more and more, I think it's important to take into account these perspectives as well, because the interests they have may inform different opinions.
Okay, I think Sam's got a couple of questions.
Yeah, it's good that you incorporated the frequently asked questions. You already answered a lot of the questions that were in the chat, but there's one remaining. It's Danya's. Were there any perspectives or recommendations that came out of the deliberative approach that really surprised you?
Yeah, there were. Thank you, Danya, for the question. There were plenty, but the thing with this deliberative approach is that the outliers usually get filtered out through discussion. So, for example, there was a really heated discussion on what actually genetic discrimination would be. Like, if I choose to share my genomic information in a specific situation and I make this conscious choice, and someone else would describe this as genetic discrimination. For example, some employer or a bank, whoever offers me a benefit if I'm willing to share my genomic data, and they give me all the information about what they will do with this data, can I actually give them this data? And so this came back to the property right you have over your genomic information and your autonomy, like what are the limits? And the discussion got really, really, really heated, and it got so heated that in the end, it all boiled down to your property right over your genome, which still remains a hotly debated issue. And even in recommendations, the citizens weren't able to reach a consensus. But it was really surprising to me that some people would actually allow genetic discrimination if they consented to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. So I think we're out of time now, and I would like to thank all of you, Christian and Annelie and Wannes, for your really insightful presentations, and have a nice day.
Thank you for having us.
And can I just remind everyone before we go that the next LPAG session, which takes place at 5:00 Central European Time today, titled "The Interplay of Law, Policy and Genomics," again here in virtual session room 4. So we hope to see you all then. And finally, apologies for some of the technical issues we had earlier. It wouldn't be a virtual meeting without a few glitches, but thanks for bearing with us, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.